The forest is a place people go to escape, to find peace in the quiet among the trees. But sometimes, the forest doesn't want to be left alone. 3 people went into that silence, carrying nothing but their plans and their trust in one another. Only one came back, and what he carried with him was not just the weight of loss, but a story so strange and unsettling, it challenges everything we think we understand about the wild. Tonight, you will hear what happened inside those trees, and what it means to return when the forest keeps its secrets close. But before we get started, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's journey into the darkness is just the beginning. These stories are only going to get more terrifying, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Let me know in the comments below, because the night is only getting started, and the horror is about to unfold. On a late Friday afternoon, 3 friends, Michael, Joshua, and Leah, set out with the kind of excitement that comes only before the unknown. Their destination was Pine Ridge Forest, a vast stretch of thick trees and winding trails nestled deep in the countryside. To most, it was just a forest, a place for fresh air, a weekend away from city noise. But Pine Ridge was known locally for stories that refused to die, whispers of people who had gone in and never returned. Michael, the unofficial leader of the group, had always been drawn to places with a hint of mystery. He wasn't the type to scare easily, and he saw the forest as a challenge, a chance to prove himself. Joshua, his childhood friend, was quieter, more cautious but trusted Michael's judgment. Leah, the skeptic, laughed off the local warnings as mere superstition, tales passed down to keep curious visitors away. As the sun dipped lower, they arrived at the forest's edge, where the trees grew thick and tall, their branches twisting like fingers blocking out the fading light. The air was cooler here, and the scent of damp earth mixed with pine was heavy. They found a clearing near a river, its surface smooth like glass, reflecting the darkening sky. It was the perfect spot to set up camp, or so they thought. They worked together, pitching tents and gathering wood for a fire. The mood was light, laughter echoing softly among the trees. But beneath the surface of their easy chatter, there was an unspoken tension, a flicker of doubt that none dared voice. As they moved through the underbrush, Michael joked about the stories, disappearances, strange sounds, dismissing them as myths designed to scare children. But if you listened closely, beyond the crackling of twigs and rustling of leaves, there was something else. A faint whispering, like breath caught just beyond hearing. It slipped through the trees and curled around their campfire light, impossible to place or follow. Joshua paused, glancing toward the shadows beyond the fire's reach, his smile faltering for the briefest moment. Leah shook her head, brushing off the unease. "It's just the wind," she said. But the whisper stayed, faint and almost mocking, as if the forest itself was awake, watching, waiting. They settled down for the night, unaware that the silence around them was already breaking, and that something inside the forest was beginning to stir. As night deepened over Pine Ridge, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The fire flickered low, casting long, trembling shadows that danced along the trunks of ancient trees. Michael, Joshua, and Leah sat close together, sharing stories and trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over them like a weight. The cheerful lightheartedness from earlier had faded, replaced by quiet glances toward the dark beyond the circle of firelight. At first, the only sounds were those of the night, distant calls of owls, the rustle of small creatures moving through the undergrowth, the soft trickle of the river nearby. But soon, those sounds began to change. It started with the faint snap of a twig, too deliberate to be the wind. Joshua's eyes locked on the edge of the tree line, where the firelight couldn't reach. A soft, dragging noise echoed just beyond sight, like footsteps moving slowly, carefully, but with no shape visible. Leah tried to laugh it off, her voice thin and tight. Probably a deer or some animal. But even she glanced nervously into the dark. Michael's confidence wavered for the first time that night as the forest seemed to close in around them. Then came the whispering, not the gentle wind, but voices low and distant, almost syllables, impossible to understand but impossible to ignore. Michael stood, flashlight in hand, stepping toward the noise. "It's probably just someone else out here," he said, but his voice carried a tension that didn't reach his words. The others followed, uneasy, their breaths visible in the chilly night air. They called out, but their voices were swallowed instantly, fading into the thick blackness like echoes lost forever. Suddenly, Joshua stopped and pointed to the ground. There, half buried in the dirt, was a single shoe, old, worn, covered in mud. None of theirs. Their eyes met in growing dread. They searched nearby but found no trace of the owner. Only broken branches and disturbed earth leading deeper into the forest. Their phones lost signal. The compasses spun wildly, useless in the thick, tangled woods. The feeling that something unseen was following, watching their every move, grew heavier with each passing moment. The shadows stretched longer, the whispers louder, until the forest itself felt alive and hungry. When Joshua disappeared, it was quiet at first, a step away from the group, a sudden silence where breath and heartbeat should have been. The panic that followed shattered the night's fragile calm. Michael and Leah called for him, their voices raw, desperate, but he did not answer. The forest swallowed their cries. In that moment, they realized Pine Ridge was not a place for visitors, and the forest was not content to let them leave. The night grew colder, heavier. Michael and Leah stumbled blindly through the underbrush, their breath ragged, eyes straining to pierce the thick darkness that seemed to press closer with every step. The absence of Joshua was like a wound bleeding silence around them. No footsteps, no voice, only the haunting knowledge that he was gone. And somewhere in the depths of Pine Ridge, something had taken him. Michael's flashlight cut through the black, revealing glimpses of twisted roots and broken branches, but nothing that could explain the disappearance. They followed the faint trail of disturbed earth, moving deeper, drawn forward by a grim mixture of hope and terror. Then, just beyond the reach of the light, they found it, a small clearing, unlike any place they'd seen on their map. The trees here were ancient, their bark scarred with strange symbols, jagged lines and swirling marks carved deep, raw and bleeding sap in the dim light. On the ground, dark stains marred the earth, glistening wet and fresh. A chill crawled up Michael's spine as he bent down, fingers trembling, touching the sticky, coppery scent of blood. From the edge of the clearing, a low, guttural sound began to rise. A chant, almost human, but warped, twisted into something else. Michael and Leah exchanged a look of silent dread. The whispering voices from earlier had turned into a chorus, surrounding them, closing in. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, bending as if alive, shifting closer with silent intent. Then movement, a figure stepping forward from the darkness, tall and impossibly thin, its face obscured beneath a tangled mass of branches and leaves. It didn't speak, but the silence itself screamed. Leah gasped, stumbling back, but Michael was frozen, caught in the terrible stillness. Suddenly, the figure vanished into the trees, leaving only the cold emptiness behind. Leah grabbed Michael's arm, urging him to run. As they fled, branches seemed to reach for them, thorns tearing at their clothes and skin, the forest itself fighting to hold them captive. Behind them, the chanting faded, replaced by Joshua's voice, distant, broken, begging, calling out their names. But no path led back. The forest was no longer just trees and earth. It had become a trap, and the night had only just begun. Dawn arrived quietly over Pine Ridge, pale light filtering weakly through the dense canopy. Michael was found alone, wandering near the river where they had camped, clothes torn, face pale, and eyes distant. Leah was never seen again. When asked what happened, Michael remained silent, his lips sealed tight as the forest itself. But the truth, as always, finds its way out in fragments and whispers. His phone, recovered beside the river, held the last moments of their ordeal. The video showed Joshua stepping off the path, shadows flickering oddly at the edge of the frame. A sudden shriek cut through the night. Then, unexplainable shapes, twisted forms slipping through the trees like smoke, their movements too swift to be natural. And finally, the camera fell, capturing only darkness, and a low growl, deep and terrible, rising from the earth. Locals say the forest claims more than just people. It takes their memories, their voices, the very parts of them that make us who we are. Michael returned, but he was not whole. He never spoke of what he saw, only that some things belong to the woods now. Pine Ridge still stands, its secrets buried deep beneath tangled roots and silent shadows. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, you can hear the whispering, a faint calling, of those who never came back. Among the countless stories whispered through the ages, some places carry a weight far beyond their walls and wood. Deep within Blackwood Forest, there stands an abandoned cabin, a relic untouched by time, and untouched by anyone brave enough to stay. For years, it has been avoided by locals, not because of any visible threat, but because of the way it feels. It is a place where the air thickens and the shadows linger longer than they should. Liam was drawn to such places, a solo hiker with a fascination for abandoned buildings, forgotten spaces that spoke of histories left behind. He wasn't a thrill seeker, but there was something in the quiet solitude of places like Blackwood's old cabin that called to him, a chance to touch the past and uncover stories no one else dared to chase. On a crisp autumn morning, with mist still clinging low to the forest floor, Liam packed his gear and set out. The path was narrow and overgrown, the forest dense and silent save for the crunch of dry leaves beneath his boots. As he walked deeper into Blackwood, the trees grew taller, their bare branches forming an almost solid roof above, filtering the weak sunlight into cold, fragmented patterns. After nearly 2 hours, Liam reached a small clearing, and there it was, the cabin. Its weathered timber walls leaned unevenly, with patches of moss and ivy crawling up every surface, swallowing window frames and doorways alike. The roof sagged under years of neglect, and the porch was cracked and littered with fallen leaves. It was as if the forest had been waiting for decades to reclaim this place entirely. Liam stood still, studying the cabin in silence. It was beautiful in a way, but the beauty was strange, unsettling. The air here felt heavier, as if charged with an unseen presence. He felt, more than saw, that the place was watching him. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled, but curiosity pulled him forward. He raised his camera and began to film, capturing the peeling paint, the rusted hinges, the shattered glass that caught the muted light like dark eyes. The forest around was so still that every creak and groan of the cabin seemed amplified, as if the building itself breathed with a slow, tired pulse. Liam circled the cabin, noting the old journals and scraps of paper scattered near the foundation, yellowed and brittle. Among them, a torn page with faded writing hinted at a family that once lived here, disappearing without a trace decades ago, leaving behind only warnings scrawled in desperate hand. As the wind whispered through the trees, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin wasn't empty, that it held memories and perhaps something more, something that lingered and waited patiently for the next visitor. He took a deep breath, knowing that stepping inside would change everything. As the afternoon wore on, Liam stepped cautiously toward the cabin's front door, its wood swollen and cracked with age. The air grew cooler, heavier with a scent he couldn't place, something earthy, mixed with decay and an unshakable trace of something metallic, like old blood. His flashlight cut a narrow beam into the darkened doorway, illuminating dust motes swirling in the stale air. Inside, the cabin was frozen in time. The floorboards creaked softly beneath his boots, their groans echoing through the empty rooms like whispers from the past. Furniture lay overturned, draped in thick layers of dust, and the wallpaper peeled away in ragged strips, revealing the faded skeleton of once vibrant patterns. In the corner, a shattered mirror reflected a fractured image of Liam himself, a stranger in a forgotten world. He moved deeper, guided by a mixture of fascination and unease. Suddenly, the faint sound of something shifting caught his attention, a soft thud from the far room. Liam froze, breath catching in his throat. The silence that followed was thicker, almost waiting. He called out, his voice hesitant, but the only reply was the hollow echo of his own words. Setting his camera to record, Liam explored the kitchen area, where rusted pots still hung on hooks and the remnants of a fire pit were cold and covered with soot. On a small table lay an old journal, its pages brittle and yellowed, filled with hurried handwriting. The entries spoke of fear, of things lurking just beyond the edge of sight, and a desperate hope that the cabin would protect its inhabitants. As he read, the temperature dropped sharply, his breath now visible in the air. The hairs on his arms rose as the shadows seemed to deepen and shift unnaturally. The cabin felt alive, not with warmth, but with a quiet hostility. Then, without warning, the front door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. Liam spun around, heart pounding, flashlight trembling in his hand. He rushed to the door, pulling and pushing, but it refused to budge. A low creaking sound filled the room, the slow, deliberate movement of floorboards above, as if someone, or something, was pacing just overhead. In the growing darkness, Liam was no longer sure if he was alone. The feeling of being watched intensified, pressing in from all sides. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying faint echoes of voices, soft footsteps circling the cabin, and a quiet, relentless knocking from within the walls themselves. Night fell swiftly, turning the cabin into a hollow shell swallowed by darkness. Liam's flashlight flickered and sputtered as if struggling against some unseen force. The air grew colder still, a biting chill that seeped into his bones and stole the warmth from his skin. Each breath came in shallow gasps, visible in the heavy silence that settled like a shroud. The slow creaking above him morphed into something more deliberate, footsteps pacing, heavy and uneven, echoing through the wooden beams of the ceiling. Liam's heart thundered, pounding so loud he feared it might burst from his chest. He called out again, voice trembling, but the only response was a long, drawn-out silence that wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket. Suddenly, the cabin seemed to breathe. The floorboards groaned as if flexing beneath him. The walls whispered unintelligible words just out of reach, and shadows flickered at the edges of his vision. Liam spun toward the window, catching a glimpse of a figure reflected in the cracked glass. Tall, blurred, its face hidden in darkness. He spun back to the room's center, and the temperature dropped even further. The flashlight's beam fell on the door. It was no longer just shut, but sealed tight, as if the cabin itself refused to let him leave. Desperation surged. Liam pounded on the walls, on the door, but his knocks were swallowed instantly. The ceiling above groaned louder, and then came the whisper, a breathy voice right behind him, cold and close, speaking words he couldn't understand. He whirled around, heart in his throat, but nothing was there. The silence returned, heavy and absolute. Liam sank to the floor, clutching his head, overwhelmed by the oppressive presence that had settled over the cabin. He understood then, this place did not welcome visitors. It did not tolerate trespassers. The cabin was a vessel, a prison, and somewhere beyond these walls, something waited, patient, watching, and ready to claim another soul. When daylight finally crept back through the shattered windows, Liam was nowhere to be found inside the cabin. The door, once sealed tight, hung open, swaying gently in the breeze. Outside, near the edge of the forest, hikers discovered his backpack and camera abandoned on the moss-covered ground. The footage on the camera was chilling. It showed Liam exploring the cabin's rooms, growing increasingly tense as shadows seemed to move just beyond the frame. The last recorded moments captured a whisper close to the microphone, a voice faint and pleading. Then the camera fell to the floor with a heavy thud, plunging the screen into darkness. Locals say Liam's disappearance was not the first, nor would it be the last. The cabin stands still, its windows like hollow eyes, silently watching. Some say the forest doesn't just reclaim the physical. It reaches inside, stealing pieces of those who linger too long. And every so often, when the wind is still, the cabin seems to sigh, as if breathing, waiting for the next visitor to step across its threshold, unaware that once you enter, the forest never lets you truly leave. Ravenwood Forest is a place of whispers and shadows, a vast wilderness tangled with endless trails that wind and weave like a maze. Known among locals for its thick fog that can descend without warning, the forest holds a reputation not just for its beauty, but for the many who have wandered in and never found their way out. On a clear morning, a small group of 4 friends set out to hike the less traveled paths of Ravenwood, eager for adventure and the escape only deep woods can offer. There was Jacob, the natural leader, steady and practical, Maya, sharp-eyed and cautious, Daniel, light-hearted and curious, and Nina, the youngest, full of nervous energy but determined to keep pace. They began the trek together, moving carefully along familiar markers, the crunch of their boots on dry leaves the only sound in the still forest. The trees towered high above, their branches knitting together into a canopy that filtered the sunlight into pale green shadows. The air was cool and smelled of earth and pine, but there was something else, a faint chill that seemed to cling beneath their skin. As they moved deeper, the fog began to roll in, a creeping mist that curled and thickened, blurring the edges of the trail and swallowing the forest floor in a ghostly haze. The group debated briefly over which route to take. Jacob suggested they split briefly to take shortcuts, trusting their phones' GPS and maps, hoping to meet up ahead. But the forest had other plans. Moments after separating, Nina vanished. One moment she was there, laughing as she stepped off the main path toward a narrow, twisting trail. The next, she was gone, swallowed by the fog and the trees with no sound, no sign. Her friends called her name, their voices cracking against the silence, but the fog swallowed their words as quickly as it had their friend. Panic set in. The group scrambled to reunite, their hurried steps and shouted names echoing off the ancient trunks, but the forest seemed to shift and change around them. Familiar landmarks disappeared, the paths twisted in impossible ways. Each turn led them deeper into Ravenwood's labyrinth, and as the fog thickened, a cold certainty settled over them. Nina was lost, and the forest was not going to give her back easily. As the friends struggled to find their way through Ravenwood's thickening fog, the forest seemed to close around them like a living maze. The trees no longer appeared familiar, trunks twisted in strange angles, branches knotted together as if to block every path. The undergrowth grew denser, clawing at their legs, while the cold air grew heavier with every step. Jacob, Maya, and Daniel called out for Nina, their voices strained and desperate, but the fog swallowed the sound, twisting it until it was barely a whisper lost among the rustling leaves. They found her belongings, a scarf caught on a low branch, a water bottle lying abandoned on the mossy ground, signs left deliberately, as if marking a trail. But the trail led only deeper into the forest's endless shadow. Panic flickered in their eyes, but they pressed on, following broken twigs and disturbed earth where Nina might have passed. Every direction seemed to fold back on itself, paths looping in impossible circles. Their phones flickered with weak signals that vanished just as quickly, compasses spun wildly, leaving them blind in the wilderness. At times, they heard it, soft crying carried on the wind, distant but unmistakable, weaving through the trees like a ghostly song. Yet when they ran toward the sound, it always drifted farther away, slipping through the fog like a phantom beyond reach. Dark shapes flickered at the edge of their vision, fleeting glimpses of something watching from behind the trees, never close enough to see clearly, but close enough to stir every instinct. Shadows stretched long and thin, bending and twisting as if the forest itself was alive, watching and waiting. With every passing minute, the line between the forest and nightmare blurred. The three friends realized something terrifying. Ravenwood was not just a forest. It was a labyrinth with no exit, and Nina was trapped somewhere within its endless folds, a prisoner of the mist and the shadows that refused to let her go. The fog grew thicker still, wrapping around Jacob, Maya, and Daniel like a suffocating blanket. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, hearts pounding not only from exhaustion but from a growing, gnawing dread that something unseen stalked them. The trees pressed closer, branches reaching out like fingers, closing off every escape. Desperation led them deeper, until they stumbled upon a narrow cave hidden behind thick vines, almost invisible to the untrained eye. Its mouth was dark and cold, breathing a chilling breath that seemed to carry the echoes of lost voices. Against every instinct screaming at them to turn back, they stepped inside, drawn by the faint hope that Nina might be trapped within. The air inside was thick and heavy. Strange drawings covered the walls, crude shapes etched deep, depicting twisted faces and strange symbols. The faint light of their flashlights danced over the rough stone, revealing what looked like tiny handprints smeared with something dark and sticky. Then came a sound that froze them, a soft voice, distant but unmistakably Nina's. A desperate plea for help echoed through the narrow passageways, bouncing off the walls and fading into silence. They called out to her, voices breaking as they begged for a sign, any clue. But as they moved deeper, the cave seemed to twist and shift around them. The path behind them vanished, swallowed by darkness. The walls closed in, the air thickened, and then, blocking their way, a dark figure emerged. Tall and impossibly thin, its face hidden beneath a veil of shadows, it stood silently, unmoving yet impossibly present. The figure's eyes, or what should have been eyes, glowed faintly, cold and empty. It was the forest's guardian, a living nightmare born from the earth itself, a sentinel that demanded sacrifice. Panic seized them as they turned to flee, branches and roots seeming to grab at their legs, the forest pulling them deeper into its grasp. The voice of Nina faded to a whisper, lost in the overwhelming darkness. Only one of them made it out. When the first faint light of dawn touched the edge of Ravenwood Forest, only Daniel emerged from the shadows. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt and hollow, eyes reflecting a terror that no words could explain. Behind him, the forest swallowed the silence, hiding the fate of Jacob and Maya, and the truth about Nina. Daniel's whispered words chilled those who heard them. "It's not the forest that's dangerous, it's what lives beneath it." He spoke of a presence, something ancient and patient, waiting beneath the roots and stones, something that claimed those who strayed too far from the path. The friends who vanished were never found. And deep within Ravenwood, the fog still drifts, the labyrinth waits, and the silent watcher remains, ready for the next footsteps that dare enter its grasp. 3 forests, 3 stories, 3 disappearances that remind us that nature's beauty often hides its darkest corners. Tonight, we walked alongside fear itself, into places where the silence screams and shadows linger long after the light fades. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these forest stories chilled you the most? Was it story 1, story 2, or story 3? Write your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever felt the forest watching you? Or heard something you wished you hadn't? Your experiences could help unravel the mysteries that still haunt these woods. If these true horror stories held you tight tonight, and you want more tales that unravel the unexplained, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because in this channel, the darkness always has a story, and the next one could be closer than you think. Until then, keep your doors locked, your eyes open, and remember, some paths are better left untaken.